I'm embarrassed to bring you around my friends. She admitted at dinner. I paid the bill, walked out, and never came back. A month later, her friends threw a party and invited me without her. She showed up anyway. And they told her to leave. She looked at me for help. I ignored her. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. Thanks. I should have known something was wrong when Chloe didn't laugh at my joke. It was a stupid joke. One I'd made a dozen times before. We were in my kitchen and I was trying to wrestle the lid off a stubborn jar of pasta sauce. You'd think with all these gains from hauling lumber, I grunted, flexing comically. I could defeat a single mason jar. Usually, she'd play along, patting my arm and saying, "My big, strong man." This time, she just offered a tight smile and scrolled through her phone. Just run it under hot water. Mark, I'm a carpenter. I build things. Decks, bookshelves, sometimes even intricate pieces of furniture. I like the feel of wood grain, the smell of sawdust, the satisfaction of creating something solid and real from a raw material. Chloe was a junior marketing manager who lived in a world of metrics, brand perception, and social media trends. We were different. And for 3 years, I thought that was our strength. I grounded her. She pushed me to try new things. Or so I told myself lately. The push felt more like a shove. Specifically, a shove toward her friends, Sarah and Megan. Sarah was dating a guy named David, a litigation lawyer whose handshake could crack walnuts, and whose conversations revolved around his BMW M5 and Golf handicap. Megan was perpetually between boyfriends, but never between opinions, each one sharper and more dismissive than the last. They were a unit, a triumvirate of judgment, and I was their favorite, albeit unspoken. Subject, I remember one night at a painfully trendy cocktail bar, a place where the lights were too low and the drinks were too sweet. David was holding court about some high-stakes merger. So, Mark, Megan had cut in, a sly smile on her face. Chloe tells us, "You're building a shed. It's a garden studio for a client." I corrected gently. Full insulation, French doors, the works. How quaint. She'd said before turning back to David, "Anyway, you were saying about the shareholder vote." Chloe had squeezed my hand under the table. A silent apology. Later in the car, she'd said, "Don't mind Megan. She's just like that. You just have to learn to play the game a little. Maybe next time, talk about the business side of your work." The finances, I'd shrugged. The finances are simple. I build something. They pay me. I'm not playing a game. Chloe, I'm just being me. She said a sound. I was starting to hear more and more. I know. Baba, I know. The night of the dinner, I thought I was trying. I put on the dark blue button down she bought me for my birthday. It was a little stiff. The fabric unfamiliar against my skin. But I knew she liked it. I'd even booked a table at Verve, a new farm-to-table place she'd been buzzing about for weeks. The menu was full of words like foraged, emulsified, and deconstructed. I was looking forward to a burger. She was quiet when I picked her up, her eyes scanning me up and down. "You wore the shirt?" She said. A statement, not a compliment. "I did," I said, leaning in for a kiss. She offered her cheek. The restaurant was all exposed, brick and soft Edison bulbs. We made small talk over our drinks. Look how he payé for me." I rose. For her, the conversation was like walking on a frozen lake, hearing cracks beneath my feet, but not knowing where to step. Then she brought up Sarah and David's upcoming wedding. The invitations came in. They're gorgeous. Engraved. David's parents are paying for the whole thing at the Cresmore Hotel. That's great. I said, taking a sip of my beer, I'm happy for them. Despite everything, the seating chart is going to be a nightmare. She mused, tapping her perfectly manicured nail against her wine glass. I just hope we're at a good table. Not with Megan's weird cousin or something. I chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. Hey, as long as I'm not seated next to a lawyer who wants to talk about golf, I'm good. I'll just do my signature dad dance moves to embarrass you on the floor. The carpenter shuffled. It was the same self-deprecating, harmless humor I'd always used, the kind that had made her laugh and call me adorable in the past, but her face didn't soften. It tightened. She set her glass down with a precise click. "Mark," she said, her voice low and serious. We need to talk about stuff like that. The frozen lake gave way. I felt a cold plunge in my stomach. Stuff like what? The jokes? The dancing thing? It's just a little corny. I stared at her. My pint glass frozen halfway to my mouth. It's a joke. Chloe, I'm not actually planning a dance routine. You don't get it. She let out a breath. The one she reserved for explaining basic concepts to a child. It's not about the dance. It's about the vibe. David is a partner at his firm. The people at this wedding, they're important. They have a certain expectation, and I, a lowly carpenter, don't meet it. I tried to keep my voice light, but the edge was there. Don't be dramatic. It's not about your job. It's about presentation. It's about fitting in. Every time we're with my friends, I feel like I have to manage you. I have to steer the conversation away from fantasy football or your latest project and towards something else, something they'd find interesting. It's exhausting. The words landed like physical blows. Manage you? Exhausting. I saw the last 3 years in a new horrifying light. All the time she'd squeeze my hand, all the gentle suggestions, all the sighs. They weren't loving nudges. They were corrections. She was a curator and I was an exhibit that was constantly out of place. Then she delivered the killing blow. She looked me dead in the eye, not with anger, but with a pitying, painful honesty. The thing is, Mag, I'm embarrassed to bring you around. My friends, the noise of the restaurant, the clatter of plates, the murmur of conversations faded into a dull roar in my ears. Embarrassed, the woman I loved, the woman I'd built a life with for 3 years, was ashamed of me. She misread my silence for stoic acceptance. A problem to be solved. I'm just being honest, so we can fix this. She said, her tone softening into something that was almost worse than the cruelty. You just need to try harder for us. That was it. The fracture became a chasm. There was no us to fix. There was her, and there was the person she wanted me to be. And I was finally irrevocably done, trying to bridge the gap. I didn't say a word. I didn't slam my fist on the table. I didn't tell her how her words had eviscerated me. I simply raised my hand and caught the waiter's eye. I made a small writing motion in the air. What are you doing? Chloe asked. Confusion, wrinkling her brow. The waiter brought the black leather folder. I opened it, counted out enough cash to cover my beer, here, wine, and a generous tip. I placed the bills inside, closed it, and stood up. I looked down at her, at the beautiful, familiar face of the stranger who had just dismantled our relationship with a single sentence. Well, I said, my voice eerily calm. A flat lake after a storm has passed. I wouldn't want to embarrass you further. I saw the shock register in her eyes, the dawning understanding that this wasn't a negotiation. Have a good life. Chloe, and I turned and walked out the restaurant, leaving her sitting there alone at the table, surrounded by the aesthetically pleasing ruins of what we used to be. The cool night air outside the restaurant felt like a baptism. It washed over me, cleansing the stifling, perfumed atmosphere of the dining room from my lungs. I didn't run. I didn't stagger. I just walked to my truck. A 10-year-old Ford F-150 with a few scratches and a lot of memories. And got in. I sat there for a full 5 minutes, hands on the wheel, staring at the glowing facade of Verve. My heart wasn't hammering. It was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. The initial searing heat of the betrayal was already cooling into something else. Something solid and immovable resolve. I didn't feel the urge to cry. I felt the urge to act. The first thing I did was take out my phone. My fingers moved with a clinical detached precision. I went to my settings, found her name, and blocked her number. Then I opened Instagram, found her profile, a carefully curated grid of sunsets, brunch plates, and pouting selfies, and blocked her. Then Facebook. Then any other app where her life could bleed into mine. It wasn't an act of rage. It was a quarantine. I was cutting out a sickness. I started the truck and drove away from the restaurant, from the person I'd been trying to be for her. I didn't drive to her apartment. I drove to mine. For the next 2 days, I was a ghost in my own life. I went through the motions. I showed up on a job site, framing out a new sunroom. The physical labor was a blessing. The rhythmic pounding of the hammer, the shriek of the circular saw, they drowned out the echo of her voice in my head. I'm embarrassed to bring you around. My friends, my guys, Pete and Leo, knew something was off. Everything, all right? Boss Pete asked during a lunch break, gesturing at my untouched sandwich with his own, you've been staring at that wall for 10 minutes. Just thinking about the header beam for the far side. I lied, offering a thin smile It's all good. It wasn't all good, but it was becoming manageable. The pain was there, a deep ache, but it was being slowly encased in a shell of pure, unadulterated focus. On the third day, I knew I had to tie up the last loose end. I drove to her apartment building after I was sure she'd be at work. In the passenger seat was a single cardboard box. It contained a toothbrush, a spare phone charger, a worn-out university sweatshirt she'd permanently borrowed, and a small framed photo of us from a hiking trip, a time when her smile seemed real and not just a tool for a photo op. I pulled up to the sleek, modern building, a place I'd come to know as well as my own. I didn't feel a thing walking through the lobby. I nodded to the doorman, Frank, an older guy I'd always gotten along with. Afternoon. Mark? He said, his cheerful demeanor faltering when he saw the box. Everything okay? Hey, Frank, could you do me a favor? My voice was calm, steady. Could you make sure Chloe gets this when she comes home? Frank's face fell. He'd seen this play out before, just never with us. Ah, yes. I'm sorry to hear that. Son is for the best, I said, and for the first time, I actually believed it. I wasn't just saying the words, I was feeling their truth. Take care. Frank, I turned and walked back to my truck. I didn't look back at the building. I didn't feel a pain of loss for the night spent on a balcony or the mornings in a kitchen. Those memories belonged to a different man. A man who believed in a lie. That night, in the silence of my own workshop, a converted garage filled with the honest scent of pine, oak, and varnish, I found my solace. I stood before a large, rough slab of reclaimed barnwood, what I'd been saving for a special project. It was gnarled, full of character, with cracks and old nail holes that told a story. Chloe would have called it flawed or rustic, in that slightly dismissive tone she used for things that weren't perfectly polished. I ran my hand over the rough grain. It was solid. It was real. It didn't pretend to be anything. I didn't start a brand new project. I didn't have some explosive creative burst. I simply picked up a piece of sandpaper and began to work back and forth. Back and forth. The repetitive motion was a meditation. With each pass, the memory of her words, corny, exhausting, embarrassed, lost a little of their power, their sharp edges worn down like the wood beneath my hands. I was sanding away the parts of me she had made me feel were shameful. I was smoothing the surface, not for her, not for anyone else, but for myself. I was remembering who I was before I started trying to fit into the tiny, suffocating box of her expectations. I was a builder, and for the first time in a long time, I was building something for me. A new foundation. I didn't know what the final structure would look like, and for once, I was okay with that. The peace was in the process, in the simple, undeniable truth of the wood beneath my hands. A week after the dinner, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a text from an unknown number. I already knew who it was. Unknown number. 917P. Mark? It's Chloe. I got the box. Can we please talk? This is ridiculous. You can't just end a 3-year relationship over one conversation. I read the words. I felt a flicker of something, not longing, not sadness, but a cold disappointment that she still didn't get it. It wasn't one conversation. It was the truth. She had finally spoken out loud. I didn't reply. I selected the message, tapped, block this caller, and placed the phone back on the bench. I picked up my sandpaper and went back to work. The only sound was the gentle, persistent whisper of grain being smooth, of something raw and damaged being made whole again on my own terms. He was gone, and I was never going back. Weeks bled into a month. The world kept turning, and my new, quieter world began to feel more real than the old one ever had. The phantom limb of my relationship with Chloe stopped aching and became a distant memory. A story about someone else. My workshop became my sanctuary. The project with the reclaimed barnwood had evolved into a console table, the natural cracks and imperfections filled with a dark, shimmering epoxy that looked like rivers of night sky cutting through the wood. It was bold, unique, and utterly me. I posted a picture of it on my business account, and the response was immediate. A local interior designer, impressed by the piece, commissioned 2 more for a boutique hotel. She was styling, the validation was nice, but it was nothing compared to the deep personal satisfaction of creating something without a single thought for whether it was embarrassing or not. I was at the lumberyard, running my hand over a stack of fragrant cedar, when my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but it had a local area code. Mark? Hi. It's Sarah. The name hit me like a bucket of cold water. Sarah. Chloe Sarah. The high priestess of judgment. My first instinct was pure fight or flight. What fresh hell was this? Was she calling to berate me for breaking her friend's heart? To deliver a manifesto on my inadequacies? Sarah, I said, my voice neutral, giving nothing away. There was a pause on the other end, a hesitation I wouldn't have expected from the normally self-assured woman. Hey. So I know this is probably weird, calling you out the blue. You could say that I replied, not helping her, right? She took a breath. Look, my birthday is next Saturday. I'm having a get-together at my place. Just some people, some drinks. We'd really like it if you came. The world tilted on its axis. I was so braced for an attack that this invitation felt like a physical blow. My mind raced. Was this a trap? Was Chloe going to be there waiting to ambush me? Was I the designated entertainment for the night? The pathetic ex they could all pity. I'm not sure that's a good idea. Sarah, I know, she said quickly, and I get it, but Chloe won't be there. The silence that stretched between us was heavy with everything she wasn't saying. She's not invited, Sarah added, her voice dropping, becoming more confidential. Things have been complicated since you two split. I leaned against the stack of cedar, the rough bark biting into my palm, grounding me. This was the first crack, the first whisper of the karma I hadn't dared to hope for. I said nothing, letting the silence compel her to fill it. Sarah, Sahil. The sound crackling through the line. She's been a mess. Honestly, and not in a sad, heartbroken way, in an angry way. She's been saying some really nasty things about you, Mark. And look, we were her friends. We tried to be supportive, but some of the stuff she said was just so entitled, so mean. It made us wonder what she says about us when we're not around. There it is. The hypocrisy exposed. The very social currency she valued above all else was devaluing before her eyes. And it was her own doing. She told me she was embarrassed to be seen with me. I said the words calm, a simple statement of fact. I felt no need to hide my wound from her. It had already scarred over into armor. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. She told you that to your face, at Verve, right before I left, Jesus, Sarah whispered. Megan and I, we didn't know it was that direct. There was a new note in her voice, something that sounded like genuine remorse. We thought it was just a fight, but that's just cruel. Mark, and we're sorry, we see it. Now, we see her now. I didn't want their apology. It was 3 years too late. But I was curious to see this new world where I was the invited guest and she was the exile. So, Sarah continued, her voice tentatively bright again. The party, it would really mean a lot if you came. No drama, I promise. Just a chance to hang out without the toxicity. I looked down at my hands, calloused and stained with wood dye. These were the hands she was embarrassed of. These were the hands that were now building a life she would never be part of. Okay, I said, the decision feeling, right as I made it. Text me the address and time? Really? Oh, that's great. Mark? Really? The relief in her voice was palpable. It'll be fun. I promise. I hung up and slid the phone back into my pocket. I stood there for a long moment, surrounded by the raw, honest materials of my trade. The air was filled with the scent of potential of things yet to be built. A slow, grim smile touched my lips. It wasn't a smile of vengeance. It was the smile of a man who had just seen the first domino fall, knowing he hadn't been the one to push it. Chloe had set them up herself. One dismissive comment, one cruel justification at a time. And now they were starting to topple. The night of the party, I almost changed my mind half a dozen times. Standing in front of my closet, I stared at the dark blue button down from the fateful dinner. It hung there, a ghost of the man I used to be. I pushed it aside and reached for a soft, well-worn Henley and a durable jacket. I was going as myself. Take it or leave it. Sarah's apartment was in a modern high-rise, the kind with a concierge and ambient lighting in the hallway. I could hear the thrum of music and conversation from behind the door. For a moment, my hand hesitated on the bottle of wine I'd brought. This was the Lion's Den. This was the inner circle of the very people I'd been deemed an embarrassment to. I knocked. The door swung open, and it was Megan who greeted me. Her eyes widened in genuine surprise, then crinkled into a smile that seemed real. Mark, you came, she said. stepping aside to let me in. Here, let me take that. She relieved me of the wine and leaned in, lowering her voice. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. The apartment was full of the same people from the cocktail bars and group dinners. David, the lawyer, was holding a beer, deep in conversation with someone else. A few heads turned my way, but the looks weren't of judgment or pity. They were nods of acknowledgement, a few tentative smiles. I was an anomalu, a break from their usual script. Sarah spotted me and weaved her way through the crowd, throwing her arms around me in a hug that felt surprisingly earnest. Thank you for coming, she said into my ear. Really? Happy birthday, Sarah, I said, returning the hug briefly before stepping back. I found a spot near the balcony, content to observe. I made small talk when people approached me, but I didn't force it. I talked about my work, about the hotel project, and I saw their interest was genuine, not condescending. It was a bizarre, upside-down world. The very things Chloe had taught me to hide were the things they now found intriguing. An hour passed. The wine was flowing, the music was good, and I'd actually started to relax. I was in the middle of explaining the process of stabilizing live edge wood to David, of all people, who was listening with a fascinated expression when the atmosphere in the room shifted. The door, which had been left ajar for people coming back from the balcony, swung open. Chloe stood there. She was frozen in the doorway, her eyes sweeping the room, a desperate, hopeful smile plastered on her face. She was dressed to impress in a tight sequin top and heels, a stark contrast to the casual party vibe. Her gaze scanned the familiar faces, and then it landed on me. The smile vanished. Her face went pale, then flushed a deep, mortified red. The cognitive dissonance was almost visible in the air around her. He's here. Why is he here? She recovered quickly, her survival instincts kicking in. She ignored me and marched straight towards Sarah, who had gone rigid near the drinks table. Sarah, hey, sorry I'm late, Chloe said, her voice too loud, too bright. The Uber took forever. She moved in for a hug. Sarah took a subtle step back, holding her wine glass between them like a shield. Chloe, what are you doing here? The music seemed to dip, or maybe it was just the collective held breath of the room. Chloe's laugh was a brittle, nervous thing. What do you mean? It's your birthday. Of course, I'm here. Her eyes darted toward me again, a flicker of pure panic. Can we please talk outside? She pleaded, her voice dropping. There's nothing to talk about, Sarah said, her voice cool and firm. It was the same tone she'd used to dismiss waiters, but now it was aimed at her former best friend. You need to leave. The words hung in the air, absolute and humiliating. Chloe's composure shattered. Leave? Sarah, what is this? Is this because of him? She jabbed a finger in my direction, her voice rising into a shrill register. He's turning you all against me. Mark, tell them how you just abandoned me at a restaurant like a coward. All eyes were on me. This was the moment she wanted, the dramatic confrontation where I would either defend myself or crumble. Given her the center stage she craved, I didn't give it to her. I simply took a slow sip of my beer, my expression neutral. I was a spectator at a play I'd already seen. It was Megan who stepped forward, placing a hand on Sarah's arm. No one's turning us against you. Chloe, you did that all by yourself. How? By being honest? Chloe cried, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. By being a bully? Megan said, the word landing with the force of a gavel. The room was utterly silent. We heard what you said to him. I'm embarrassed to bring you around. My friends? She mirrored Chloe's earlier jab, pointing right back at her. Well, guess what? We're embarrassed to be around you. It's exhausting. The mirror was held up, and Chloe was forced to see her own reflection. The hypocrisy was laid bare publicly and brutally. Her face crumpled. She was exposed, cornered, and utterly alone in a room full of people she thought were her allies. Her wild, desperate eyes found mine again. This was her last resort. The final sinking hope that the man she'd once called safe would rush to her rescue, that the old loyal Mark would appear and save her from this nightmare. Mark, she whispered, her voice breaking, a single tear tracing a path through her makeup. Please help me. Don't let them do this. Every pair of eyes in the room swiveled to me. This was the climax. This was where I could vindicate her or destroy her. I looked at her. I saw the tears, the desperation, the utter ruin of her social standing, and I felt nothing. No schadenfreude, no anger, no pity. Just a vast, quiet emptiness where she used to be. I turned my head away from her towards Sarah. I gestured with my beer bottle toward the kitchen. Hey, Sarah, I said, my voice calm, conversational, and completely detached from the scene unfolding before us. Where did you get this IPA? It's really good. The silence that followed was more profound than any outburst could ever be. It was the sound of a person becoming a ghost. I heard a choked sob, then the sound of heels clicking rapidly on the hardwood floor and the slam of the front door. She was gone. The party didn't instantly revert to its previous energy. Tinsa. Awkward, quiet, settled for a few minutes before the conversation slowly started up again. Hushed and speculative, I stayed for another half hour, long enough to be polite, to finish my beer, and to thank Sarah again for the invitation. I'm so sorry that happened, she said at the door, her face full of genuine contrition. Don't be, I said, and I meant it. It wasn't your fault. It was just the truth finally coming out. She nodded, understanding. I hope we'll see you around. Marg? I just smiled non-committally and stepped out into the hallway. The night air was crisp and clean. As I walked to my truck, I scanned my own emotions. I expected to feel triumphant, victorious, but I didn't. The feeling was simpler, purer than that. It was peace. The final desperate look on Chloe's face, the raw need for my help, for any lifeline, was already fading from my mind, becoming indistinct, like a dream upon waking. She had looked at me and seen a savior. I had looked at her and seen a stranger. Her chaos was no longer my concern. Her consequences were not my burden to carry. I drove home with the window down, the cool wind washing over me. There was no soundtrack of angry rock or empowering anthems, just the hum of the engine and the quiet of the night. Back in my workshop, I flicked on the single pendant light that hung over the new project. I had started a sleek, modern rocking chair for a new client who was about to become a father. I ran my hand over the smooth, sanded armrest. I thought about foundations. Chloe's had been built on sand, on perception, status, and the approval of others. A single, honest wave had washed it all away. Mine was built on this, on wood and glue, on sweat and patience, on the quiet certainty of a joint that fits, a surface that is smooth, a structure that will hold weight, and last, it was built on the truth of who I was, without apology. The man she was embarrassed of was the man who was building a life that could withstand any storm, and she was just a bit of weather I'd calmly finally walked away from. I picked up a clamp, tightened it onto the chair's frame, and got back to work. The future was waiting, and it was solid. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. What do you think about this story? Share it in the comments.